Welcome to Westwood Media Monthly, the hyperlocal show giving you an inside perspective on the people and places that are the fabric of our community. I'm your host, Melinda Garfield, and in this episode, we spoke to Superintendent John Antonucci to find out more about his career with Westwood Public Schools. Welcome, John Antonucci, Superintendent of Westwood Public Schools. Thank you for joining us today.
It's great to be here.
So I guess my first question for you, when did you start working at Westwood Public Schools?
Yeah, so I've been superintendent here for 12 years. I arrived in Westwood in 2005.
And just because Westwood Media Center is kind of a breeding ground for training purposes, I think some of our students might be really interested in knowing, how do you get to be superintendent? So let's start with, where did you go to college?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'll tell you more, but I have a bit of a non-traditional background for superintendencies, which we can talk about. I have an undergrad degree from Tufts University. I also have an MBA, a Master's of Business Administration from Boston University, and since I've been in Westwood, I also have received a doctorate in educational administration from Northeastern.
Okay.
But my undergrad was in political science from Tufts.
Gotcha. Did you go and get your master's right after undergrad?
No, right after undergrad, I actually worked in a bank, the then Fleet Bank. Fleet's no longer in existence, they've since merged, but I was in a leadership development program, a kind of management training program with them for about 3 years, and I decided to leave there to pursue an MBA, like I said, at BU.
So you said your first job was in banking. What was your career path? What was your second job and third?
Yeah, so I kind of have a unique route. So after I got my MBA, I did a few small jobs. I did some small consulting jobs. But my first, I would say, real job after that was as a finance director for a public school system, the Bedford Public Schools, right up Route 128. And I had a great opportunity at Bedford. I worked for a superintendent who was a very seasoned, kind and generous and talented person. And he really mentored me, actually, I'd say, for the 5 years I was there. So that was my first entree into public education, but it was on the business side of things as the finance director. Interesting.
So why did you want to become superintendent?
Yes, that's a great question, I sometimes jokingly refer to myself as an accidental superintendent. I wasn't one of these people who came out of childhood or college thinking that my path was going to land me in the superintendency. But I had some great experience at Bedford, like I just mentioned. And in the early 2000s, I had an opportunity to go to a different district. It's called the Neshoba Regional School District. It's a 3-town regional, Bolton, Lancaster, and Stowe. In late 2002, they had a major financial crisis that landed them, quite literally on the front page of the Boston Globe. And so I ended up being recruited and having the opportunity to go to Neshoba as the assistant superintendent, still focused mostly on the business and finance side of things. But I had the opportunity to go to Neshoba, for lack of a better term, to do a turnaround. There was actually the state hadn't quite taken them over. They weren't in receivership, but there was a lot of state oversight. And it was a very high profile job. And by then I was 7 or 8 years into public education, and I had also started to round out my resume. I started taking on different responsibilities outside the business and finance realm. I taught a class at Neshoba Regional High School. I would serve on things like the professional development committees, just to broaden my own skills. And I think because Neshoba was such a high profile job at the time, that I started getting some attention as someone who might be able to provide some district-wide leadership effectively. And so the rest is history. I started getting calls about superintendencies. I received a call from a recruiter who was doing the Westwood search, and I ended up landing here. So my path was different, and it wasn't necessarily intending to end up in the superintendency, but it's the greatest thing I ever did.
That's great.
Yeah.
So starting in Westwood Public Schools, when you walked in,
yeah.
What were some of your challenges that you faced? And when you start a new job, whether it be in television, in a school system, there's always going to be challenges. What were some of the things that you first saw that you knew that you had to take on?
Yeah, Westwood was a different place back then, and still a wonderful town, and steeped in tradition. But a couple of things. One is that I think the trust and maybe the credibility in the school department had been slightly compromised in the prior years for a whole host of different reasons. One was that they were in the middle of a very challenging high school construction project, which was not only new for the town, they had never really done a project of that scale, but it was expensive and they just had some challenges with it. So, I don't know. I don't want to read too much into that, but there was this question about whether the schools could be trusted and whether or not they were running the operations well or efficiently. And related to that, there were some financial challenges. Back then we didn't have University Station, we didn't have the commercial development that we have today, so money was always tight. And so one of the things that I brought to the district, I hope, was very transparent, open leadership style. I happen to be relatively good at the budget side of things, but I think I was also good, or at least attempted to be good, at providing a level of transparency that the town maybe hadn't seen before. Trying to create budgets that were easy to understand, that even the layperson could understand, not just the school committee or the finance committee or the board of selectmen. So we sort of opened the doors a little bit. So those were kind of the two main things I worked on, sort of trust and credibility.
Yep.
And money. In my second year, and it was challenging. My first year here, we actually had layoffs, and again, it was a different time. Right. My second year, we launched a pretty significant operational override campaign. I think the number was $2.8 million, and that was an incredible exercise in, I think, civic action, where people really rallied behind the schools. I obviously, as superintendent, had to step up, and I tell this story a lot, but that year, in 11 weeks, I made 39 presentations on the budget. I was in people's living rooms, I was at the senior center, I was at public meetings, and again, it was an effort to actually secure resources for the schools, right? We were looking for money, but it was also to say, hey, we are transparent, we're open, we want your input, and we want to work with you instead of in opposition. So those two things were what I really worked heavily on in the early stages, and you weren't here back then, but I'm happy to report that it was a successful override campaign, and that ended up sustaining the schools, and I'd add maybe the town for several years. It just made the next decade just that much easier. So it was worth the effort.
Sure. So piggybacking off of that, what would you consider to be your biggest accomplishment during your career here?
Biggest accomplishment. So, certainly speaking to that type of thing, I think people really do understand us now as a school department. I think we have earned the trust and the credibility that was once lacking. It's hard to quantify that, but I feel really good about that. In addition, I think, and this is impossible to quantify, but I think we've just developed a culture of excellence in the Westwood Public Schools. I like to think we've hired well. If I have a legacy here, people talk about legacy when they leave. If I have a legacy, it's the people I'm leaving behind. We have an all-star caliber team of faculty and staff and administrators, and that takes time and effort, and that's something we build up over the years. But related to those people is the culture. It's just a warm and inviting district. We do well at all levels of the organization, whether it's customer service or academics. There's no detail too small for me. So again, it's impossible to quantify, but I think our culture is second to none. And anecdotally, I can tell you when people walk into our schools, they feel welcome, they feel warm, and they see our kids especially as just being unique. They're amazingly poised and polite, and you do not see that everywhere. And so I feel good. Again, it's hard to measure, but you can feel it when you're in our buildings.
Absolutely. Okay, so we know you're moving on.
Yeah.
What are some goals that you maybe weren't able to accomplish before, the end?
Yeah, so there's always things that you want to do and didn't get to, or priorities shifted for various reasons. I think the top thing, and we've been talking about this for the last about 3 years here, is I think that our elementary schools, and I would add the middle school to it, they are in desperate need of attention. They're aging resources. Hanlon School, Deerfield School, Sheehan School are wonderful school communities, but the buildings have really exceeded their useful lives. And so we're in need of infusing some resources into those buildings, whether it's renovations or additions or new buildings. So we had engaged the services of an architect about 2 or 3 years ago to do a massive space and capital needs study that showed us that we had a lot of different options, from keeping all 5 elementary schools and just making some repairs, to on the opposite end of the spectrum, something that I would prefer, which would be to close some of the buildings, consolidate them, and maybe go from 5 elementary schools down to 4, or 5 down to 3, to create not only buildings that will sustain the community for the next 50 years, but also to provide a level of efficiency that we just don't have today with 5 buildings. So I say that by way of background. We did a lot of work as a school committee for a solid 1.5 to 2 years. We kind of had to put the brakes on about a year ago, partly because there were some questions that the community felt that they needed answers to, and I think that was maybe fair criticism, that we hadn't engaged them as well as we thought we were engaging them. But also we needed to speak with the state Mass School Building Authority, who provides reimbursement for big projects like that. Okay. And they asked us to slow down to engage them in their process. So we're kind of in the middle of that process now. But to answer your question, that's something that I just didn't get done. And so I'm not sure I regret it as much as I'm a little disappointed that the timing didn't work out. But it's definitely going to be, I think, one of the biggest challenges for the next superintendent. And I think something that the community sorely needs. It's a very emotional topic because people love their elementary schools. Right. They love their neighborhood schools. But at the same time, as far as fiscal responsibility and efficiency and sustainability for the next 50 years, something has to happen. And I didn't get that done. Right. So I'm looking forward to maybe being part of that process as a community member and seeing what happens.
Yes. So actually, speaking of community member, I did have one question for you. I think there's this notion that if you're the superintendent, you have to live in town. Is that true?
No, that's a great question, actually. No, in fact, and more, it's unique. I don't have a statistic, but very few superintendents live in the communities. Partly because there's a high rate of turnover in this job. Mm-hmm. So we have some statistics from Massachusetts. Right now in Massachusetts, the average stay for a superintendent in a community is about 4.5 years. Wow. So I've done 12, which puts me really as an outlier, statistically. Sure. That being said, the best decision I ever made, both as a family and as superintendent, was moving to Westwood. Me being able to be fully integrated into the community. I raised 3 kids in the Westwood Public Schools. I'm 2.5 miles to my office. It is the best decision I ever made. It's very challenging to do because you're really never off as superintendent. Yeah. So I was a father and I was superintendent, and you sort of had to wear both hats simultaneously over the years, as did my kids and my wife. Sure. And thankfully, she is one of the most social, personable people you'll ever meet. And so we did well. Mm-hmm. But it was both challenging and the best decision I ever made at the same time.
Cool. Getting back to the new superintendent coming in, what's your advice? What kind of words of wisdom can you bestow upon her in her new venture? Yeah,
so as you know, the next superintendent is Emily Parks, yes, who is currently the assistant superintendent and is a career Westwood Public School employee. She was a teacher here, assistant principal, high school principal, and now assistant superintendent. Emily and I have worked side by side daily for 12 years, so I couldn't be more excited about her taking on the new role. So as far as advice to give her, I'd say, one is maybe just very generic, but just try to enjoy the job. The superintendency can be all-consuming. People forget, but the schools are very complex, sort of diverse organizations with a whole host of different issues that kind of come at you on a daily basis. And once in a while, you can forget that we just have an awesome job. That we're helping and supporting and fostering, 3,200 kids every day.
Right.
And so one way I've sort of reminded myself of that is just to ensure that you actually get out of the office and into the schools, whether it's on a daily basis or a multiple times a week basis, just to remind yourself that all the hard work is for a great reason. And Emily will do that. She is like I said, a career educator, and she's been a principal, so she gets that. So, but that's hard to do sometimes. You do get pulled in. Second thing I would say maybe is just to do what I've done, which is rely on the great people that we have around us. I think a lot of superintendents get caught trying to do everything by themselves, and it's impossible to do. So what I've done, and I know Emily will do the same, is surround herself with this really talented, smart people. So to the extent that you can delegate and just work as a team versus an individual, I think she'll be should be successful. She's going to be successful. She is, I think, one of the smartest people I've ever met, but also she's a brilliant leader. Westwood's lucky to have her.
Yes. What will you miss most about Westwood Public Schools?
Well, I think it goes back to the people. I've already talked about that a couple times, but I've hired, I don't know a percentage, but I probably have hired 85 to 90% of Westwood Public Schools employees. Again, I've been here for a long time. Right. It is just a great team, and showing up to work every day and being able to work with these people has been a gift. And so, yeah, it's going to be hard to leave. And I'd say too, Westwood is just a special community. It's hard to describe unless you live here, but the parents, the town administration, they're so supportive. They provide us help and resources in so many different ways. And I think it's a special place. And it's not the only special school district, and I'm hoping Duxbury is equally special. But yeah, I mean, leaving Westwood behind from a work standpoint was something that I gave great thought to. So yeah, I mean, it's really about the people and the culture. It's a very unique, special place. And I'm thrilled that I'm going to be able to be part of this community, hopefully for years to come. So
finally, what are you most looking forward to when you start working for Duxbury?
Yeah, so, I think change is necessary, and change is great for people. And that's what this was for me, which was, as I said, the average superintendent stays 4.5 years. Right. I've been here 12. There's still a ton of work to do, and I know I left some things on the table, but at some point I know I needed the change for my own professional growth and development. And I also think the district, whether they know it or not, I think they need the change too. New opportunities for people, a new voice, a new lens to look at problems. So that's what it is for me going down to Duxbury is, can I replicate some of the successes we've had here? Can I build another strong culture and build upon what they've done, because they're a great community and a great culture too. They are definitely going to have some significant financial problems down there. They do not have the tax base that Westwood currently has. They don't spend at the level that we spend. And so that is probably going to be my number one challenge, is trying to figure out how to run a great system with very limited resources, and potentially how to get more resources for the schools. But that also is a cultural challenge too, is again, building up down there the level of trust and credibility and transparency and kind of honesty that's taken me 12 years to build, so I kind of have to start over. Right. But to me, that's exhilarating. Good. And we'll see if I have it in me one more time.
I'm sure you do.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again for joining us, and we wish you nothing but the best.
No, it's been my pleasure, and thank you very much.
The Westwood community wishes John luck in his new position and look forward to having Emily Parks do great work in the next school year. Are you interested in being a guest on our program? If so, please contact me at the email address below. We hope you join us for future episodes of Westwood Media Monthly. I'm Melinda Garfield, and from all of us here at Westwood Media Center, thank you for watching.